A quick warning before we begin. This episode contains frank talk about suicidal thoughts. If that's something you're struggling with, maybe skip this episode, pick up the phone, and talk to someone you trust. As I can tell you, and my guest can tell you from personal experience, it does get better. You matter, and you are not alone. That said, for anyone having a hard time with mental health who doesn't mind hearing about it, there's a lot in this episode that I hope can be helpful. Preface. A couple of years ago, while deployed in Iraq, I came very close to killing myself. It wasn't the war that got into my head, because I did just fine going after the world's most wanted terrorists. What got me were the kind of problems that all of us, no matter our circumstances, might face at one time or another. It all added up and weighed me down until the darkness just became too heavy. Tough guys don't talk about this kind of stuff because we think it makes us look weak. Being a real man, though, starts with being real with yourself. Fact is, too many guys are struggling with suicidal thoughts, and too many guys have been lost to their demons. I'm about as tough as they come, mentally and physically, and I was very close to being one of them. It's not a pleasant story to tell, and it definitely doesn't show me at my finest, but I'm bearing my vulnerabilities here anyway to clear space for other guys to talk about being overpowered by their feelings. I'm stepping up to tell my stories so that others can summon the courage to tell theirs. It's time we own our shit. That is the preface to Into the Darkness, a journey of love, war, and emotional freedom by Dave Fielding. Dave served in Iraq and Syria and elsewhere as a U.S. Army Green Beret and operative with multiple three-letter intelligence agencies. While serving in Iraq and Syria, he was involved in the raid to kill Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, and the strike that killed Iranian Revolutionary Guard commander Qasem Soleimani. He now lives in his native Massachusetts, where he is a health and wellness coordinator for the Essex County Sheriff's Department. Welcome to Notes from a Ghost, a podcast about stories and the people who tell them. My name is Charlie, and I'm a ghostwriter. I love a good story. I hope you enjoy this one. Dave, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Charles. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Um, Happy to be here, with a fellow New Englander.
Oh yeah, and we're going to talk about all that it means to be from New England in a second. Yeah, the book is phenomenal, and it's something I've already recommended to some friends, and both veterans and civilians alike. Um, but real quick, for listeners who may not know, we have a fairly international audience, and I think a lot of Americans don't know the answer to this. What do Green Berets do? And how does what you do differ from the regular army or even other special forces, special operations units?
Well, Green Berets, we do a lot. We do a lot. The key thing about being a Green Beret is being a master of the basics, right? There isn't anything that you learn that some special whiz bang technique, tactic, or procedure, right? It's about mastering really the basics of infantry tactics, um, counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, unconventional warfare, right? We're masters of unconventional warfare, but like unconventional warfare is such a broad term, right? And as we see the war in Ukraine and kind of how that is even evolving and changing how we do things. Not that I'm, still in or anything, but I'd imagine that a lot of my fellow Green Berets are paying very close attention to that war, to kind of learn and adapt. So it's like ultimately, what are we really good at doing? Well, we're really good at going into a country, figuring out a tough problem, working with that country's host nation military, and taking care of it, right? And a lot of these, if you look at the Special Forces has nine principal tasks, right? And it goes from less kinetic to most kinetic, right? And the most kinetic would be dropping in, securing a nuke site would be probably the most extreme of extreme situations in terms of what special forces operate would be employed, or at least Green Berets. But majority of the job, right? And I'll take a majority of my career is going in, working with host nation units, looking at their problems, looking at Uh, I spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia prior to my stint in the intelligence community. So it's majority of my job is going in, talking to guys and being like, yo, what are your problems? What are the network, what are the terror networks that you're going after? Like, so in the advent and after GWAT, or, when 9/11 happened, Green Berets were deployed around the world, to enhance other host nation militaries so they could hunt down terrorists and snuff it out. And so that ultimately it's like, and I'm sure you have people all walks of life listening to this podcast. And from a business world, is that we're kind of like war consultants, like we go in, we're like, what are your problems as an organization, right? And they're like, this terror network, probably not good for you. You know what we can do for you? We can give you some training and we're going to help you get rid of that problem, and so it, to kind of, I kind of laugh about that, but I mean, it really, the bare bones of like that's what it is. Like, you're an organizational change agent, and it doesn't matter what your role is on the ODA. So ODA stands for Operational Detachment Alpha, right? That's the Special Forces A team. So if you remember back in the day, you had, the show A Team, Mr. T, da 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 da, right? So it's like that. Love that show, but that was what it was based on. You look back, Special Forces traces its lineage all the way back to World War II, and you had the operations detachments, and that were deployed behind enemy lines to work with the French resistance to blow up bridges and stuff like that. And a lot of that is like, you have to speak the language, you have to, have some ground truth. I think as the world gets more and more complicated, we look at more and more towards our special operation units to perform, tasks quietly and behind the scenes. Because like I think about how much time I've spent in Southeast Asia. I spent 5 years of my life there. Um, probably a year of that of the time I was there was probably spent just in the Philippines. Like, and so it's, I know Mindanao pretty well, right? And, I know the problem sets pretty well. And I know people in their military very well. And we developed these like really great relationships with people. I remember in Thailand, my ODA was invited to a dude's wedding. Like, and like these are the type of things that you do. And you're masters of the culture, you know the language, and more importantly, you know your art, you know the art of war.
And it's interesting you give the example of the Philippines too, because I think, and again, if I'm going to go, I'd say we have a range of people listening to this from, I've worked with a lot of veterans who are authors, but also, there are plenty of people living in Europe who don't have a great view of American military, like getting
Hmm.
involved in things. But when you talk about the Green Berets, we could be talking about sending a dozen Americans to a country that has actually invited them to be there in a, like you described, like a consulting role. Um, and that's a reality that I guess by its nature exists very quietly. Um, one thing I want to get back to that consulting because and I think too there's this whole cottage industry of people who want to learn lessons from your community in business or whatever. But real quick, I want to take a little detour into being from New England, specifically
Of course.
Massachusetts.
Love it. Yeah.
I remember I went to school in San Diego and I can remember um I was like I had a couple friends who were like from kind of Boston area and stuff and anytime we'd get together, we would just sort of talk about being from Massachusetts. And I can remember like this friend of ours from like Orange County. She was like, "Do you guys talk about anything besides like being from Massachusetts?"
No, it's the best thing in the world.
The best thing I mean, Massachusetts invented America, didn't we? I mean,
Basically, I mean, as far as I know, no one else fought in the Revolutionary War. No, and it's just so funny because like we're victims. Everyone is a victim of their own history, right? And serving in the military, you serve with a lot of people from the South, and they're like, Revolutionary War, what's that? It's Civil War. It's all about the right. And it's just like we're like, what? Paul Revere is one of the greatest Americans, like and shortly thereafter, he founded Dunkin' Donuts, and then like you know what I like, and it's just
yes.
a lot of funny, degenerate stuff that Bostonians get, and it's just this mix of like you have the best universities in the world, right? But then you have like some like the most blue collar, you know, background of people that just like are here, right? I grew up in a blue collar family. A lot of people that I know grew up blue collar too, and it's you like part of being a New Englander is like that work ethic, right? And that hard work ethic. Like the weather isn't so great, you got it's just this toughness that comes with just being in this area, and it's kind of funny. And like for me, for instance, right? Like I was a Boy Scout, I was an Eagle Scout, and and we were always like, I have so many near-death experiences up in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Like, you know what I
Yeah, I
mean?
was going to say
I'm
Mount
like,
Washington.
yeah, 13, 14, almost getting blown off the side of Mount Washington, like literally happened. I remember we were hunkering down on Mount Clay and we're like, is this gonna pass? Are we gonna die up here? Right. And it was like freezing rain in June, right? And it just it these are all experiences that you just get from being in this area, between the tough winters, and sometimes hit or miss summers, but like it's just how we are, and
Oh yeah.
how we
It,
are, dude,
not for nothing. Not for nothing. But
We're gonna
so
sorry, go ahead.
no, well so I read, I mean, first of all, Mount Washington, if you think about it, it is such a New England, like it's not the biggest, it's not the steepest, but it kills the most people by being like
The
an
weather.
weather anomaly that's so cold that you can die of hypothermia in June. Like,
Yeah. No, and it's just like you're really right because like you're never really ever prepared, right? You can be as prepared as you want, but as soon as that weather turns, like you're doomed. And it's like, it's the same thing. Like, um, it's just there's just so much responsibility, additional responsibilities for existing in New England than you do in other parts of the country, and there's a whole lot of like I can do it attitude and I'll do it on my own, right? Type of vibe, I guess you could say. And we're usually extra cranky because of a lot of these things. And I think it's great because people wear their emotions on their sleeve up here. And I know where I stand. They're gonna be like, "Oh, hey, how you doing?" And it's gonna be like, "Yeah, GFY, buddy." You know what I mean? I'm like, "Love you too." Have an excellent day. So it's like that and the traffic. Definitely
uh,
after having my soirees around the world, I've come back here and I'm like, "Wow, the big dig didn't do anything."
Miss Baghdad.
Yeah, yeah. There was no traffic in Baghdad. All I could do, I was rolling around. No, I didn't roll around in a Humvee, but there's plenty of traffic in Baghdad. But like, actually, the worst place traffic in the world I've experienced was Manila, Philippines.
Oh, I
Took
believe
me
it.
took me like 5 hours to go to, and
Whoa.
and I was like, we were at this camp called Camp Aguinaldo, and it's just outside. It's east of Manila. It's in Manila metro area, but it's like a little bit out of ways of where Makati, Manila is, and that's where all the nice hotels are and stuff like that. And I remember they were doing construction on EDSA. EDSA is like the main boulevard there, and like I'm like we could have walked back to the hotel by now. Like what are we doing? And we're just like sitting in this van like with crappy AC. I'm like, yep. I signed up for this. This is
Oh man. And on the New England thing, I read somewhere, and I wish I had this study, and but it was like kind of secondhand information. I'm wondering if you might know more about this, or maybe your experience can speak to this. But it was something about it was the Department of Defense was trying to figure out factors that are correlated to people passing selection courses for special operations. Like buds, like SF. And again, I don't know which one they were studying specifically, but the conclusion was that being from New England like tips the scales slightly in your favor, that there's a higher pass rate. And as a civilian, all I can think of is like I went to school with guys who'd like be wearing shorts all winter, and I mean like the same qualities you're describing. Do you think it? I mean, do you buy that? Does that sound?
It
possible?
definitely, I mean, it definitely sounds accurate. I think the harder things you do as a kid, um, really set you up for success in adult, right? There's a ton of studies out there that says like, the more you experience hardship, right, and your will to live and doing things that you don't want to do, right, they do make you tougher. They do strengthen that part of your brain that actually is responsible for that will to live. So it's like I, I like to use my father as a perfect. He is a quintessential Massachusetts guy. I talked to my best friend. My father just wrapped up his chemo and radiation therapy for throat cancer, and he's going down to Boston at Dana-Farber, which is one of the best cancer hospitals in the world, and they can't get over him because he's still laboring and plastering. He's a construction worker, right? He's been a construction worker for over 40 years, right? He's still laboring and plastering, and he feels sick as a dog, and he's like, Davey, I just got to keep moving, kid, And like, and that's
Love
the
it.
mentality. That's the mentality. I was talking to my best friend and he was laughing. He goes, "Yeah, your dad's one of those tough Boston guys. He's still working, isn't he?" Right. And I was telling him about it. Right. And so we were laughing. I'm like, "Yeah, that's him." But, it's, I grew up, I never needed a summer job because I was always working for him. And, you grow up in construction. They're they're bullying you. They're talking shit. It's like, relentless, especially as a young kid, you know what I mean? And so you grow up in that environment, but that's just, my story is just so common, I think, with a lot of guys, especially like I work, working in the job I work now, I work with corrections officers. They all grew up the same way, right? And it's
Hmm.
like, and the majority of us, you're either Irish, Italian, or a mix of both. Like, and we all grew up liking the same food and that same like hard work ethic, this country's a meritocracy, type of mentality. And, the harder you work, the you'll be able to enjoy the fruits of your labor. So I think it's like, I'm very long-winded with it, but like, yeah, there is a toughness up here that can't be replicated anywhere else.
Love it. And when that's so New England too, to think that we really are quite special.
Of course. There's a reason Harvard University's here, you know?
Right? Oh man. Um, so one thing I want to get into your book and I want to kind of shift gears a little bit into the mental health stuff because to me like the that just resonates and I think in a way that's like beyond way beyond of it being a veteran story, although it certainly speaks to that. But one thing, that really stood out to me is like you throw the spotlight on what was happening at home kind of before and during your deployment.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm talking like bills and dating and text relationship problems and long distance
Yeah.
and I thought it was so interesting because I think one of the ways we can kind of put people in the military on a pedestal is to think that those problems somehow magically don't exist for
Yeah.
someone doing work as important as yours or and when people say like thank you for your service, they never mean like, thank you for putting your life in a storage unit and dealing with all that shit.
Yeah.
But yeah, tell me a little bit about that decision from like a storytelling point of view to go there.
Absolutely. No, I'd love to. And there's so many books out there that I feel like, guys want to tell their story and they tell their story and it's amazing and it's inspiring. And I've done some cool things, but like, I was never, never when I signed up for Special Forces, I signed up for the Adventure Plus package, right? And so that, I knew I did my homework. I knew what I wanted to do. I was totally willing to die on the side of the Hindu Kush, with 11 other of my best friends for this country. How I was brought up in the area, I brought up in, very patriotic dude, and so it's like I look at kind of why I told the story. We have so many books out there that talk about that. I have lost more friends to suicide than I have lost friends to combat, right? And the reality of what we live in now. We have more veteran suicide or active duty deaths than we do that have died in the wars. And it's staggering, right? And so I think that instead of, telling a story about how, a story of how tough, my upbringing and everything else, I was like, no, I want to talk about how broken I was, right? How I ignored all these internal dialogues inside of me, because I looked around and, at one point in the book, when I found out about how Lou died by suicide, that broke me. That broke me in like it really hurt. It really hurt. And and I had to, at that point, I was struggling with my demons. It was about like a year or so later that I was like, I really need to tell a story. And that's I wanted to tell the story from no, I'm not, all right, yeah, I've done really cool things, but guys, I struggled deeply, right? And this is why I struggled. I did the homework, I worked on myself and the healing journey is a you never actually ever fully healed, gang, right? So if you're looking for the answer is that it is a journey and it is never ending and you will be constantly working on yourself, but you got to make that commitment. So I mean, that was the real motivation. I wanted to show, um, the worst part of myself instead of the best part because I just
Mm.
felt it's to, like I said in the preface, to empower other people to own their
And like, what would you say to someone who is in that moment? I mean, the part that, I can definitely point to a point in my life where I was like, I didn't know what getting better was going to look like, but I knew that what I was doing wasn't working. Like I was right at that kind of critical moment. Like, what would you say to someone who's there? Kind of like, I mean, the part that really stands out for me was when you like marked the date where you basically decided not to die.
Yeah, I think it was, I mean, looking at it was definitely a journey to get there, right? And I think what it was I'm trying not to spoil the book, but like I love the way I say it is that and then it hit me literally in a concrete way. That's literally what I say verbatim. And I got hit. I was in a car accident. It's in the middle of COVID. I'm battling with my demons every single day, right? And that internal dialogue, right? That was like, we're not good enough. We're never gonna get it. We're never gonna get what we want. Um, uh, no one will love me. Um, it's just I can't win. I can't win. That was like probably the biggest one was the biggest lie I told myself, right? It was part of that unhinged internal dialogue that was eating away inside, right? It's like that whole like I can't win, right? Between dealing with a divorce, dealing with, love lost, right? And then, I didn't even enjoy the fruits of my labor on that deployment because it didn't really even matter, right? It didn't really even matter because like inside I was just I hated myself. There was so much self-hate. And the moment was, I looked in the mirror, right? And I was like, and I verbalized it. I verbalized it for the first time. I verbalized my internal feelings. And I looked at myself in the eye, right? And I said, like dead in the eye, I said it right in the mirror. And it was like, yeah, that's what we want to do. So then now what are we going to do about it? You know? And it was kind of just letting it out was a catharsis, finally, admitting it, the first thing, like, that is like step one of this book is own your shit. And I think about so many guys that are out there, and friends, and since this book has come out, I've had a ton of friends from special forces reach out to me about their own struggles. And so it's like, have to, that's the one thing is admitting it, right? And owning it. And then after that, it gets better, right?
Mm,
But you have to be disciplined about it, right? And there's a lot of people, there's people out there that say discipline equals freedom. It does, right? And I will even say that my own discipline saved me because, despite, dealing with all these things, my coping mechanism was exercise, right? So, for me, it was always getting those little hits of dopamine, and it's just the thing is like, you know, once you own it, you have to have compassion for yourself too, right? And
Hmm.
years of being in the military, we don't have a whole lot of compassion for ourselves, because it's always like, we got to be tough, we got to deploy, we can't show weakness and this, that, and everything. But it's like, you know, it's not even just showing weakness, it's just admitting like, you know what? I'm not enjoying life right now, and I need to do some work on myself as to why that is, right? And really, for me, it was doing those internal conversations because as you'll read in the book, is like, I did not want to walk into behavioral health, right? And the first thing they would have did was take me off of ops, and they would have taken my mission away from me, right? So it's
Mm.
like, as a dude who's you know, made every decision in their life to be at this moment, to be in this job, right? To train, right? Dedicated. Like, I went to Norwich University. Norwich University is a military college, as I like to call it. It's located in a chasm in Vermont, and it's -30 to 45 in in January, February every year, and it dumps buckets of snow, and it's like, and you got to work out outside and everything else, right? And it's just, um, I kind of like laugh and sort of look at all those things over the period of my life, and you know you, and how I never had forgiveness for myself, right?
Mm.
But it's like, I let me backtrack a little bit, but like I planned my whole life to do this job. I always wanted to be, serve. I look at my grandfather and he was actually a POW in the Great Escape.
Whoa.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whoa.
And I grew up and I'm like, well, he can't be the best fielding. I gotta outdo him, right? So it's right. And he was actually he was in the U.S. Marine Corps. He left the Marine Corps. He goes to Canada. They make him an officer in the RAF, Royal Air Force. And then he was in the Pathfinder group in the Royal Air Force. So the Pathfinder group he was a navigated. I think he was a first lieutenant, and I think he was a captain when he got liberated. But he was shot down on a mission back from Frankfurt in February 44 and he was the only guy that survived. And he was trying to evade capture for about a week and a half, 2 weeks with no, and the German went at
Wow.
44. Yeah, you want to talk about tough, like, so it's like, so it's like, Dave, why did you, for me in that moment, right? All those experiences in my life, it's just like, no, we, we signed up for this. We signed up for the Adventure Plus package in life. Like, I can't let them take my mission away, because of this. And there's a stigma with it, right? And I mean, a large part of the book is, to kind of address that stigma is that like, hey, you're dumping millions of dollars into me, right? And I love my job and I love my country, right? And so I want to keep operating, in tip-top shape. The trials and tribulations of life do have an effect on you, you know? And so we need to be a little bit more human about it. So, when I look back at that moment was, for me was having compassion for myself, owning it, and, trying to figure out every single day, right? Doing the mental gymnastics with myself. Like as an intelligence officer, right? As a spy, you do human intelligence operations. You're always assessing your sources, right? And your assets. And you're like, all right, well, what are their motivations? What are they going to bring me today, right? And you never know. They're out in the wild. They kick them back out in the wild. and you meet with them again, they're walking in with a whole sort of problems, and you're the only person they can confide in, and also the only person that you can fix their problems too, right? So, um,
Wow, so,
it
so you were almost like your own case officer then. Like it.
absolutely. And
Ah,
so it's like I kind of case officered my way out of it in the self-assessment. And I kept looking back and I internally, I was like,
mm,
where did I go wrong? How did I lose myself? How did I go from this kid from New England, Eagle Scout, Norwich grad, Green Beret, to like this broken human being who hates themselves, right? And and just wants to end their own life, right? It's like, where did it all go wrong? And for me, a lot of self-reflection, during COVID, there was nothing but
nothing
time.
to do but self-reflect.
The
Yeah.
worst thing they did, like I was like I was like the last plane to land at Dulles Airport when I got back from Iraq. And I remember my chain of command was like, "Yeah, man, great job. You earned it. So we don't know what's gonna happen, but just hang out." And I'm like, like, right? And I'm alone in my thoughts in this English basement, right? And so I just had to, the same things that self-assess, asking and the biggest question was I just kept asking myself. And
Mm,
the most powerful question you can ask as a spy to your source, why do you feel the way that you feel, right? And in the book I mentioned it, I was like, I just want somebody to ask me why, right? And that's it's such a like that desperation of want to be human. But here I am, I'm working a lonely job, right, as it is, right? And there's a lot of isolation that the job, and here I am isolated, and it was staying focused, on that goal. And looking back at like, how did I let people treat me the way I did? And I was unpacking that with Gabriella and the gaslighting and the manipulation and all that other stuff, right? And how did I let my needs, slip so far away in dealing with my ex-wife and everything, right? And the reality that I came to is that I was literally my value of myself was on other people and how they look,
mm,
right? And it like that dynamic though, we unpack that for a sec. You look at what a soldier is, right? You put on a uniform, you put on that Green Beret. And just so for you listening, like you go and become a Green Beret, you do not automatically get six-pack abs and your life is awesome. I'm just throwing that out there for you young bucks who want to also sign up for the Adventure Plus package. But it's like when you put on that uniform and you put out, that green beret and everything else, right? There's an expectation of you, right? And you have to be this person. You have to, and so a lot of your value is, every year you're getting evaluated. You're always being assessed, right? Like selection doesn't stop. Like, and for the listeners, selection is special forces assessment and selection. It is like depending on what changes they make. It's like somewhere 2.5, 3 weeks long, and it's a arduous, fun little journey where you're going to learn a lot about yourself, and but you just got to grit through it to get selected, and so that's just the beginning, right? Is getting selected, and the Q course is, a year and 18 months to 2 years long, sometimes longer for the medics, right? And a lot of so it's like you put that uniform on, all of a sudden, like, who you were before, right? No one cares, right? Now it doesn't matter what you are. Like, it's like, what do you bring to the table today? You know, you're no one cares what you did yesterday. What are you doing today? And that's a very JSOC mentality, right? And Joint Special Operations Command. So it's like it's important because the mission is the mission is the most thing. And so um, and it has its and it has it's like deeply rooted in all of us, right? So it's like that sense of identity, that self-ideal, right, is starts to get determined by other people that were around the mission, or you're always going to make, number one thing is last man standing for the mission. That's what special forces, that's what it calls. But like I kind of look at that, right? And tethered my most authentic or most self-idealistic version of myself was, you know? I mean, kind of look at it. It's like when I made the decision to go to Iraq, and I don't want to spoil it for the listener, you know, they kind of backed me into a corner with that one, you know? Like Green Beret ain't gonna say no to a deployment, man. Like I'm gonna go, like, and especially I knew this, the work that I was gonna be doing out there, and I was like, you know, that the mission is too important to gap having a person out there to do, and it's like I'm never even against my own self-interest, I'm never gonna say no mission, but it's like, but there's also that dynamic as I cared about my reputation. The reputation is tied to how other people, right? And so
Mm.
you kind of get in this like dangerous loop, um, is what, you know, and I realized that about myself. And you know, and it took me, I would say, like, you know, when the book ends, like, and I love the way how I end it because it's not all roses. You know what I mean? It isn't like there's an aha moment and I figured it out. And after that, it was great. No, no, healing sucks. It is a hard
Yes.
journey, folks. And you know, there is peaks and there's troughs, right? And you're going ups and downs. But you know, every time your downs aren't as low as the last downs. And so when I look at myself, when I, you know, and I started journaling, right? And my journaling was, I'd mark the calendar, and I would say, did I feel like killing myself today? Right? And as like morbid as that sounds, but that's just like, you know, that's a, you know, gallows humor is, you know, known, you know, dark humor. It's a very known fact that like, you know, a lot of military veterans, you know, I mean, funny and a lot of morbid stuff, right? And I kind of laugh at myself, you know, looking at myself, but it's like that's being honest. You know, that's
Yeah.
me owning my shit. Like, all right, Dave, we're doing an AAR. AAR stands for after action review. When you go out and do a mission, you come back, we say, you know, we're our worst self-critics, right? We're like, that was terrible, or you know what I mean? And you do it, there's a whole method to doing it, right? And to do it right. But like, you know, I do an own emotional AAR every day. And I was like, where were we today? Right. And then if I felt like killing, if that was one of those days of like, well, I felt like killing myself today, or you know, I didn't really want to live to, you know, my will to live wasn't that strong today. I would sit there and I would start unpacking in my head, well, what was it about today different than the successes? And I could ramble on about psychology, you know, like for a while, but like uh I think I answered your question
Yeah,
though.
no, no. And it's funny, I was going to ask you actually about like what you're doing today for your mental health. And that I think that's a that what's kind of cool about that is people can go do that themselves. It sounds a lot like cognitive behavioral therapy. Like
Totally.
and even I find like, let's say you're thinking, well, I'm worthless or I can't win. You can there's tools there where you can be like, well, like, is that true? Has there been a time where that wasn't the case?
Mhm.
What I find the good thing about like delusional self-talk is it doesn't always hold up well to like pen and paper.
Oh, totally. No, totally. Because like, and that was like, well, I mean, that was like one of the hardest things about writing, you know, the book too, is like, no, what was the raw, honest conversation? But to answer your question is like, what do I do, you know, for my own mental health now is like therapy. You know, I still seek therapy. And I look at it as maintenance. You know, the mind needs maintenance just like the body, right? I like a quote, and I remember one of my cadre in the Special Forces qualification course a long time ago. He says, if the mind don't mind, the body don't matter. And then he's followed up, right? Kind of followed up. This guy's a little bit of a quagmire of an individual. And he goes, the body leads the mind, the mind leads the body. And you know, that always stuck with me because like they go hand in hand. And if you look at me, like, and I love like using myself as an example. I mean, the whole reason I wrote the book is to use myself as an example for others, right? And so it's like, well, when I wasn't feeling great, I always worked out, right? And that gave me enough dopamine, to keep fighting a little bit longer. And I think like when we and then, but also too, it's like, our mind needs the same working out as the body does, because we can feel good about ourselves for no other reason than we tell ourselves to feel good about ourselves and remind ourselves of the reasons why we're awesome. And, you know, in expressing gratitude for who you are, where you're at, and all the things that you have in life, right? And it's not about having things, but it's the experiences, right? Well, I'm thankful, for the people that I have in my life, thankful for this. And so it's like you need that. And then, cognitive behavioral therapy is there to help you break those negative conversation loops, you know, that I was having. Like, I'll admit, like, I got myself out of that hole. I case officered my way out of that hole, man. Right. And it was a lot of fighting. But it's nice, professional help is great because you go there and you have maintenance. Everyone has bad days, and it's good. That person's there to help you work through that stuff, to be there for you, and I just think, I mean, it's terrible right now because like a lot of people are struggling, and we have a mental health professional shortage.
Mm.
And it's one of the things. So it's like I do that, like, other than cognitive behavioral therapy. I also, I continue to work out, but I also have like looked at working out as a coping mechanism. And so within that, I noticed when I was like going super hard into these workouts, so I do a lot of CrossFit, right? So CrossFit can be pretty intense, depending on what the programming of the workout is and stuff and the training and stuff. And so I realized that every time like I was like going in that red zone, my mind was also going to a very dark through. And it wasn't like until I was like living in Manhattan, or not, excuse me, I wasn't living in Manhattan. I was living in Brooklyn, but I worked in Manhattan. My last operational assignment was there. And we ended up I ended up going to CrossFit South Brooklyn, and just the total vibe, with how they were, and like, you know, training is growth, and, not every day we're going to show up and give it 110%. So it was like, I was like, man, I need to have more compassion, because like in the forces realm, right? And in the circles that I ran in, it's just like, we need to be, pushing it every day because we don't know if it's our last, right? And it's like, you got to be ready for that. You're the last man alive, and you're working, you're running around, working, trying to keep your dude alive, like putting a tourniquet on your buddy and popping off rounds. I've never been in a situation like that, but like, that's a mentality that we train for, and it's important because, the larger and back to being a New Englander, right? The larger the larger your comfort zone is, the better off you're going to be, right? In a
Mm.
crisis situation like that. And so it's like, those same physical dynamics, why not just apply those to your mind too, right? And cognitive behavioral therapy is one of those things. I recently got into the somatic psi, and as a method of dealing with anxiety, and
So
here's
is
the
that
thing.
the double inhale thing?
Yeah, it's you take two quick sniffs through the nose, and then you let out a deep breath, and you do that for, I can only handle 10 minutes. Like it will, like, before I start feeling like high, and then like, tears start coming out, and then I'm like, I love myself, like, and it's a beautiful thing. It really is a beautiful
Yeah.
thing. Like, for years I just kind of, push that stuff down, right? And 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 now I cry a lot, and I love it. Like, it makes me feel great. And that's a body's mechanism for letting go of things, you know, and
Hmm.
and it's just, these are all tools for your mind, a healthy life, And obviously a lot of that, my use, you need balance. Balance is important. And if you like, the hard thing about being Green Beret turned James Bond type spy guy, right? Like that's your world, man. Like you got to be all in on it. And I was, because there's a level of me that's like kind of a fanatic about this kind of am, but I'm very balanced in that feeling, right? You know what I mean? I have some really funny geopolitical views, and I say funny because like you won't catch me down in Harvard Square, going tit for tat with a kid at Grendel's Inn, right? And then, pulling some Matt Damon stuff like, is this her number? Like, exactly what I'm quoting, right? You like damn apples. No, I'm not doing that, right?
Oh,
You'll never see me teach geopolitics because my philosophy is very simple, is that it's just one giant gang war. We're the biggest gang on the block, and the number one drug we're pushing is US dollar. There it is. There's my philosophy, right? So,
boom.
um, and I talk about being a hood rat and doing hood rats things and kind of alluding that in my job in the book because like it's kind of funny. Like, the training, that I went through opened up with, you have this cartoon character of a larger than life human being who, did 35 plus years at CIA, saying is like, men, like, what you're learning here is a capital crime or felony in most countries. And I'm like, cool. I'm like, and it was just like my whole dynamic, with that. And I was like, there's definitely an element to me that like I love, you don't just do this job because you do it for the thrill of it too, right? And there's a lot of fun with that. So, but yes, I kind of went off on a tangent, but that's why you
Good
have me on
tangent.
here. It's for everyone else's entertainment, but like, yeah, it's like taking care of your mind is very important. So you have to find out what works for you. And, ultimately, and there's more studies coming out about psychedelics and their usage and helping with PTSD and things like that. Um, that's awesome. Like, let's explore that more, because like I think the studies that they do on veterans could really work on a lot of people. And then we could put a dent in this mental health crisis, really
Hmm.
just like most people need a friend, maybe some ketamine, and have themselves a good cry and love themselves. And I really feel like the world will be a better place. And not that I've never done any of the psychedelic treatments and stuff like that, but I just think of like, working, my job, my current job. How does it apply to my job? Like, in correction, helping corrections officers. Well, you look at the inmates, right? Trauma City, man.
Hmm.
Trauma City, right? And they grow up in these terrible environments, the products of their environments, etc. And you know what? Like, okay, yeah, it's an economic problem, but what are we really doing about it, right? And it's just like,
Yep.
maybe the same psychedelic therapies, and this is just is like, maybe those could work for them too, so they can adapt and be productive members of society. So I think it has like a lot, it could have profound effects on all these things. But, I think as veterans, as people that, normal people that go to war and see things and experience trauma and experience the same things that everyone love, divorce, you know, that really spicy, toxic relationship that almost kills you, you know what I mean? We're not all immune to that, everyone's got one. Yeah, everyone's got one,
Well,
So sorry, go
I
ahead.
mean, no, I was just gonna say, like, I know, like, and I want to get into the writing real
Oh,
quick, but
yes,
the what I
please.
think you wrote that so well because when you, the narrator, were going back from Iraq, I was like concerned for your safety.
Oh,
Like,
totally. Yeah.
but you know what else too? Like, and like it's funny you bring up Goodwill Hunting with that, which I mean, again, if you're not from Boston, you don't realize like that isn't fiction. Like that dude with a ponytail is you
They
you could
exist.
they exist. Um and thankfully so do guys like Chucky and Will and
Yeah.
but the thing I took a screenwriting class one time and I think I've brought up this example on it because I just love it on this
Uh-huh.
podcast before, but the professor said Goodwill Hunting isn't a movie about what it's like to be a math genius. It's a movie about what it's like to be a human being.
Amen.
And your book isn't about being intelligence operative and a green beret it's about owning your shit like you describe. So when you found yourself shifting gears and you had decided to write a book and to tell your story, um, what was the hardest part, or like where did that experience take you out of your comfort zone? Because I would imagine it's a very different thing to like sit down and be alone with a blank page versus some of the other work you've done.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it wasn't, for me, my process was like I wrote this book in my head, driving up and down 95 from DC or New York back to Boston to visit. And from it's depending on traffic, it could be anywhere, I could do I could do New York in 3 hours, right? I can get down, getting into Brooklyn where I lived, that was a little trickier, but like, or I'd ride an Amtrak back, and I actually started doing the Amtrak more because I was able to just sit there and think about the book, right? And think about it. So I actually just went, like at first I was like, I started writing, I started writing. And in high school, I was this, and I talked about my childhood and sort of to kind of show my personality a little bit more. It was like, the childhood antics that I would get into with my friends and in Boy Scouts, and like we were absolute savages, like and and I'm surprised I turned out the way I did, but like, in my early teen years, we were just like trying to light stuff on fire, building forts, or not even early teen years, but like 10, 11, 12, right? Like, building fires and, we made this like zip line through the woods, like
Oh
out of
man.
stolen cable from like when they hang up the telephone poles. They just
Oh
like
yeah,
left.
sure.
They just left like all this like premium steel cable, and like for us it was like a huge project, right? Like we're like, we're gonna set up this zip line. We found a bunch of dirty old mattresses. That was like our crash pad. Like so we were like, it was like I started with all those stories and stuff like that, and then I realized I was like, there's so many books that start with that. Like you're 200 pages in and you're just getting to the interesting stuff that you signed up for or what's on the cover of the book. So and it was deciding to like just be like, you know what? No, that's not what the important part of the book is, right? And so jumping into it, like, I did the beats of the chapters, right? And I was like, what is the important story points? I think it was this book could easily be 400 or 500 pages, not even including like, my previous experience and stuff like that. But, I focused on me. I focused on the emotions. Because I know a large, we'll talk about pre-publication. I know you got a question about that, like, afterwards. But like, the hardest part though was when I sat down to write it and tell the story, I had to become that version of myself again, almost like a
Mm.
method writer, if that's even a thing, right?
Hmm.
And that was the hardest part was here I am, I wrote the majority of the book, right? So we're like 18 months, 2 years after where this book ends, right? And so, obviously doing work on myself, like, my healing journey is still going on, but then it was like I would be backtracked, right? And I would, write chapter one and I'd be like, who was I in chapter one? And I would like meditate and think about the feelings and I had and the amount of anxiety. Right? There was a ton of anxiety that I had in my marriage that I didn't even really recognize. There was all these like tiny conversations inside myself that I just ignored, right? And obviously, that's where it all starts, that's where the journey of Into the Darkness begins. And so, I had to become that version of myself. I had to be and then chapter two was great because then I was like, I had a lot of fun, right? At, doing all the spy training I was doing. So, it was fun, but the version of myself that I was at that school is who wrote that chapter, right? And
So you got to enjoy the good going back there with the bad. Like when you were
yes,
method writing in a good moment, you did get to enjoy those positive emotions
absolutely. And there
again.
was like things that happen, during the deployment, like a lot of the fun. And, I think about the guys I served with, you know, and we're all senior dudes, multiple like Armin. I love talking about Armin, like, because he was just such a funny, like, this was like he's done like so many deployments, he's like lost count. He was on the fourth deployment, for just, Operation Inherent Resolve and dealing with ISIS, right? And it was just, funny to like kind of like write about, these stories and how they were and to convey who they are, like how they were as a person to put that in paper. So I had like a lot of fun. Like one of my favorite things is like, he's out, like we're about to get bombed by Iran, and it's not just some simple 107 millimeter rockets that Hezbollah typically employ. It was ballistic missiles, right? It's kind of different, like 107, it's like we go back to, there's a conversation we like to say. It's like you don't really worry about when you're gonna die. It's just if it's your time, it's your time, You just worry about the mission, right? But in these moments, you just have him. He's all kitted up, and kitted up means he's got his plates on, his helmet on, night vision goggles, and he's got his weapon, and he's just sleeping in this camping chair under the stars. It's like this, like it was like miserably cool, and it was all mud, because for a lot of people they don't know, Iraq does get rain, right? So, and there's a whole, rainy season that goes with it, and he's just like, just wake me up, when it starts happening, right? And it was just a dude that was just so like, he was just immune. You know what I mean? Like, and literally in the moment, he was like, whatever. I've done this. I've been through this so many times. It isn't going to be a big deal. But it was really funny that when they did actually hit and how quick his ass got into the bunker. Like, but if it was a direct hit, he would have been dead. You know what I mean? He would have been dead. Like, so it's like, um, I kind of look at it, writing about all these lovable characters, I have a lot of love for those guys, right? And a lot of love for like all these, other characters that are in the book. And that was like, for me, it was like, the sweetness with the real bitter emotions that of the version of myself that, and the version of myself that, I don't like, I'll never say hate because I appreciate that version of myself because I'm here today to, you know, I'm the most genuine version, of my grown self, is how I like to say it. But
Mm.
that's how it was writing them.
It's really cool. I try to talk to, when I'm working as a ghostwriter or developmental editor, I try to talk to authors about that, you're actually gonna you're gonna be more likable if you show your unlikable side
Yeah.
versus just trying to be Mr. Perfect or whatever. That actually makes you look unrelatable. There was just something you mentioned, and I knew I wanted to ask about it. Because it's kind of a big deal for anyone who's a veteran, especially kind of in your genre of
Mhm.
service, who wants to write a book. And I've been through this with authors. Um, and I want to ask you about the publication review process. There was,
Absolutely.
and I'll tell you a quick story. There was a friend of mine who's a Marine, and I was just doing some really light editing on his book, just kind of big picture, like he calls them like rudder steers.
Uh-huh.
Um, very
Such a
Marine.
marine way of saying something. Oh my God. Yeah. Rudders. Okay.
Shout out to Chris from Lawyer to Warrior. It's a great book.
Oh,
He
cool.
failed the bar exam and like was like the whole dream of just like I'm going to be a lawyer and that's going to be my ticket to just all the things I'm supposed to want didn't work out. And
Mhm.
then he was like, "Well, what about the Marine Corps?"
I love
And
the story already.
right,
Yeah, it's a
but
redemption.
oh man, and right, and and I like my heart went out to him for this part of the process because he had just done some, I mean, it was a great book already, and he made it even better through the editing process. And he's like good to go. And then he sends it away for publication review.
Hmm.
And it was gone for like 6 months.
Hmm.
And then he heard back. He got like it was like this totally underwhelming, like, yeah, all good. Like it wasn't very
Mine,
heavily anything. So what was your experience like?
I went very formal with this, because like I knew if I wrote, details about what I was, things I did, the ops and everything, and you know what I mean? Like, I wholeheartedly admit in the book, like I had a very small role in Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, right? I know what I did, but I can't even articulate anything it was. And all the credit does deserve to go to the dudes who did the raid and the people that found him, right? And so and those are two incredible stories separately, right? And but it's like if I put all these sexy details and talk about, things like it would never see the light of day, or it'd be a whole two chapters of redacted information. And I didn't want, I didn't want to ruin the experience for the reader, and the focus of the book isn't about the cool guy details. It's about my journey, dealing with the same problems that all have, right? So I actually I retained legal counsel and I was like, "Hey, how do we do this right?" And they're like, "All right, this is the process that you do." And they helped me out. They helped me with submitting it. And then I got like a formal email back and it was like, and I cried when I got the email back because I was so fearful. I was literally so fearful, like about, you know, all that stuff. Like, because the book has a noble intention, right? And what I'm trying to do with the messaging and everything else is just get people to own their shit, right? But also tell a fun, a good story, right? And so it came back and it was like, yeah, this entire book is deemed unclassified. And I cried. I was like, oh, thank God. Like, you know what I mean? I worked my ass, to describe things in the way that I did. Like, if you open up the book and right after the preface, you read the disclaimer, it's like you're probably going to want to know more, but unfortunately, that information will always be locked away somewhere.
Well, and if they roll that back in like 75 years, maybe we can get a sequel.
That'd be
Um,
cool. Or like another dude like, just writes it. You know what I mean?
yep.
And deals with it because like I think like even General McChrystal's book like took like I just kind of heard through the grapevine like it took years for it to get through pre-publication.
I
And
was going to ask, how long did that process take you?
honestly, because I was so careful in how I wrote everything, it took about a month.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay. That's,
there's a the thing is like if you don't focus on details, like you don't mention, operation, you don't talk about techniques, procedures, who's involved, things like that. That's my advice to any military authors out there that want to, do it successfully is like, retain legal counsel, right? It's a legal process like anything else. Oh man, I got it. This is not legal advice. I'm not a lawyer, right? I got to caveat that
right,
one
right.
real quick. All right. Like, maybe I'll use my VA benefits to go become a lawyer. I don't know, not yet, but I don't think law school's in the cards for me. But anyways, is like, yeah, if you just, you want to tell your story, that's the way you do it. And it can be anywhere. It depends on the amount of detail that you give, right? You know what I mean? And so they do their process. Um it could be anywhere between 6 months to 2 years, right? Depends on your length of service too, right? And
Mm.
I only talk about, you know, I only talk about when I became a spy and up until 2020, right? Very short time frame, 2.5. So I like to say it's a short memoir, it's an abridged, right? Or whatever the formal term is.
Yeah, that was the other thing I found really refreshing is the word count. It was because you just got right into it, and it's not a long book, but it like packs a punch. Um, I wanted to ask about the now I'm going to actually employ you as a consult in that consulting role, but
Mhm.
you know I want to know, like, what can ghostwriters and editors learn from Green Berets and intelligence professionals? Because, like, obviously the stakes are totally different. No one's getting killed, no
Yeah.
one's getting betrayed, hopefully. Um,
Yeah.
although
Oh yeah,
any
it's like,
ghostwriter is going
oh,
to
I
have
thought I
some
was talking
crazy.
to a ghostwriter, but it really was it was the
Oh,
it was the North Koreans. Ta-da!
we have someone coming up on this podcast, and I won't give it away too much because he does talk about this, but he
Yeah.
he was approached by a relative of the author he was working with, and they're like, everything you have been told is a lie. Like, do not proceed with publication. Like, and there was no national security angle, but it was just somebody's weird grievance project.
Yeah,
But
you get that.
yeah, I mean, there's a weird amount of hand holding that goes on in in ghostwriting, and I would imagine in big time in intelligence. And where I think there's a similarity is that, like, you can still, like, you're going to have conflict that might arise even though you're working towards the same goal.
Mhm.
And, like, I find a lot of times when I'm editing or ghosting, I have to take a very nuanced, maybe kind of side door approach to showing someone that approaching the text in a certain way is in their best interest, even if they kind of are telling you something that contradicts that. Um, and then I guess there's also like a skill gap, that we're storytelling professionals, and oftentimes we're working with people who sometimes people who don't even read books, and there's a you got to, like, there's just so much, like, managing of relationships. So I guess what could we learn from someone who has done that at the level of, like,
I will
hunting
give you,
terrorists?
I will give you, this is a perfect question because this falls definitely into, what is it like being a spy, right? And so it's like, you talk about even what is it like being a spy? What is it like being a Green Beret? You talk about motivation, right? Being a Green Beret, being a combat leader, like I've led troops in combat, and part of that is motivating a team of people who don't want to do something common goal, right? The flip side is that the beauty of it is that you're working with somebody that's motivated to get their story out there, right? And so I would say, in just looking at kind of I have a very humanistic approach to my handling of like sources and sets and stuff like that. And, I try to like I adapt like a growth mindset and what is in the best interest. And, perspective is the number one thing that we all lose sight of. So I would say if you are a ghostwriter out there and you're working with somebody and, I say this in the book, ask them why. That is the most important interrogative as a spy. When you're getting somebody, right, and they're giving you consternation, right, and they're giving you pushback, and you're picking up on body language that is like, they're kind of uncomfortable talking about this, right? Listen to that tiny voice in you and say, hey, why, tell me a little bit about how you're feeling about that, right? And then why is it that you feel that way? And then, I mean, like that's you're gonna get more beautiful writing, that way, encapsulating that. And then I remember, before I did all my spy training, they gave us a whole like reading list of, one of the difficult conversations to have is a great read.
Well, I'm
And
writing that down.
yeah, difficult conversations to have is, I think, as a ghostwriter, and for all you future adventure plus package people out there, put that on your reading. Put Into the Darkness first, then that second. But uh so it's like I talk about a lot of things that, we joke about as spies is like PT buff, put the benefit up front is an act like to use. And it's not bottom line up front, it's put the benefit up front. So when if you're able to like say you have a point in the book and you're like, I really want you to include this, and then the author's like, I don't want to include that, right? So instead of just saying that you want to include it, you got to PT buff it. You got to say, this is how it benefits you. If we put this up there, then this is the tone that we're going for. This is like, these are the aspects, this really opens up the reader to X, Y, and Z and whatever your goal is. But if you put, I mean, you just have to encapsulate those things. And then, obviously, if there's pushback, you got your number one bullet in the chamber, and that's asking why.
I absolutely love that. And that's really interesting about having a good nose for
Mhm.
where an interview could go. That's so critical, and I don't it's such a weird art. I don't know if it can be taught perfectly. Um, I, I'm I'm I'm
Experience.
low key jealous that you've had actual training in how to do that. I wonder, is there like a light version of that school for just for the interviewing side? Um,
There actually is a great school. I mean, that's a non-government school that Fortune 500 companies use and stuff like that. And they actually sent it to me, and I actually it was a lot of it's called the Art of Charm.
oh, I've heard of this.
And
It's like out in podcast land.
yeah, but the Johnny and oh God, I forget. It was a while ago I went, but th those dudes, they're great. They run a great program. They'll take a zero to hero in terms of being able to emotionally engage like that. I mean, a lot of the theories that it's not even theories, but a lot of things that they preach was things that I was just, inherently practicing, out there. Just I'm a very empathetic person, and have a lot of compassion. My mom's Italian, right? And for, the people that live outside the United States, it doesn't really, they don't know what that means, but a Boston Italian mom, very passionate human being. Father's Irish, also Irish and English, also very passionate human being. You don't want to be in the kitchen when they, get in a dispute over how they put dishes in the dishwasher. But like, I love them both to death, and I have that same passion and love for, other people too, right? So but all joking aside is that, a lot of it is, people, there's things we talk about. I remember when I did their little programming, quintessential, spy move is like I go up, I just, it's chatting up a person, right? And I get all these details about their day, what they're doing, everything else, like what they're in town for, and they didn't even get my name. And like the guys I was with, they were like, "Yeah, that's a professional right there, right?" And then they're both like, "Dude, you're creepy. You didn't even give anything up, right?" And I was like, "Oh, really? I come off creepy?" They're like, "A little bit, right?" And I was like, "Damn, right?" And so it was like, there's a ploy, is part of being, there's all these conversational ploys and stuff like that, and like give to get, right? And when I wrote my book, it's a whole lot of give to get, right? And I kind of look of like I'm giving so much of myself, giving, all these dirty, awful, internal dialogue and memories and everything else, ugliest version of myself in order to get, people to own their shit. So it's a very powerful, it's a powerful tool. So it's like in that, and even ghostwriters is giving examples of what you're looking for, not even from some other book, but from your own personal experience. Because that's the thing. Like, you're not going to be 20 something years old and do this job, right? Because you're gonna be working with an asset that's like 20, 30 years older than you. He's got 40, 50-year-old person problems, And it could be a divorce. It could be like, trouble with childcare. It could be, doesn't get to see their family at night. They got a sick family member they're taking care of. No, I'm not saying that there's young kids that haven't been through that, right? But it's, going through it yourself is a very powerful, really establish deep, genuine connections with people. And this has been a accidental accidental consequence of my book. I have people reaching out to me, about all details, and this is how this resonated with me, and this is how that resonated with me, and I'm just reconnecting with people I haven't heard from in a while, and developing, you know, real genuine connections with just computers too, right? And it's a beautiful thing, and uh, it just feels so natural and so human, It's I got a lot of love, for people. So this is my way of doing it.
Well, I mean, thanks for giving this conversation. I certainly got a lot out of it. And um, thanks for being here. I have one last like random bonus question just on the
Sweet.
level because one thing we didn't really talk about is like tactical stuff or trade craft or anything like that.
Hmm.
What is something that so like I forget when I was very, very young, like too young to have this conversation, but I can remember both of my parents like impressing upon me that you should never sit with your back to the door, like in public.
Uh-huh.
Like there's like you want to actually pick where you sit, like selectively, and some of that is from some of my dad's background, and then some of it is my mom being from a tough neighborhood in Boston.
Yeah.
Um,
Amen.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
but I think nowadays you're talking more technology. What is something that most people don't think anything of? They do it every day that you like cringe. You would never do that knowing what you know.
Like I really can't give my full opinion on that without like getting and stuff like that. But
Fair enough.
thing
Yeah.
is that I'll do this for people is that, there's a lot of people who are worried about what their data is doing online. I think that it is such a mountain of data, right? It's so vast, right? All these little details is lost in that noise. Now, there's ways of like combing through that, when you to particular, pick apart like, whatever you need, from it. But I think like kind of, to your like I think what you're asking is what is the modern day version of that,
Hmm.
you know? And it's just kind of funny because like, for me is like, positioning, I think like positioning, as a SF guy, right? And A-type personality, positioning myself like always looking at the door, right? You know? Um, I think that like highlights stuff like that, right? And because it can be seen as an aggressive act, right? And so, it's all about managing perceptions, right? And you don't get it, like I say, is like you don't get a vote on it in the book, right? Just like in real life, you don't get a vote on it, right? They perceive it a certain way. They'll either throw more assets on you or not. I mean, really, the modern day version of that, I guess you could say. I mean, I so much. People are just out there. But also though too is like be smart. Be smart about what you say online. Like everything is a recorded message. Everything is there. Like, things that we're talking about on this podcast are going to live on forever. And it's going to be, the biggest podcast ever
Yeah,
produced.
inshallah.
That's what I'm saying. Manifesting, baby. Manifesting. And then, so it's, it's, that would be probably the advice I would give to kids now and just being like, you got to manage yourself online. And honestly, I think probably just all the mental health stuff of like social media and you know, you ever say be wary of the company you keep? Your parents ever say stuff like that?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, be wary of the company you keep. Like obviously Into the Darkness, Dave, come on, dude. Like be wary of the company you keep. But it's be wary of the company and things that you follow and pay attention to and give energy to, like online. And that, I even fall, victim to it too. And but because there's a ton of misinformation out there, not just being generated by people, but by actual foreign governments, right? Who
Hmm.
are motivated to, sway popular opinion in a certain way to meet their goals, to change, what the US government is doing and what European governments are doing and how they view it. And yeah, I mean, information warfare is all around us. So I really do miss the days of like opening up the Boston Herald, man, and having having my, medium hot with cream from Dunkies, right? And, you
Oh,
know, like, there's just like some very quintessential things that are Boston, right? And that's one of them. But like, because you could read and then, discern for yourself, right? And
hmm
feel how you want to like feel. There's a ton of studies on it. I'm not, that smart to articulate on it, but the same thing applies to, kids scrolling on phones and stuff. And, so that would probably be like the modern day version of that, because all those things, like you're influenced, um, your influences matter. I thought like, look, my influences in my life made me who I was. I grew up with stories of my grandfather, that's why I went Boy Scouts. I watched uh the recruit, no, not the recruit. Yeah, wasn't it the recruit? Yeah, the recruit. Robert Redford, Brad Pitt.
oh, that's
No, I got the
no,
wrong
that's a
movie.
different. What the hell is it called? I think is that Spy Game?
Spy
The
Game. Yeah.
with
No,
Brad, they're like in Lebanon or whatever with Brad Pitt. Is that the one?
I'm just trying to think off the top. Oh, it was such a while long ago. But
Did
like
that
I grew
make you
up
want
with
to?
you grew up with like these like awesome spy movies. And I was a huge Le Carre fan. Yeah,
Oh
actually the
yeah,
movie is I just looked it up. I had to look up. I was right. My second one was Spy Game. That was my second guess. Yeah, so like that movie was really cool. And like, I grew up watching that, like Rambo. We had Schwarzenegger, you know what I mean? Like action hero type thing. And so, we're influenced by, all these things and they make up who we are, and you look at the psychology, we all have a version of our ideal. Like I'll even go back to why I went in the, do we have time? I'll
oh
go back
yeah,
to the
all the time you want.
backstory
Yeah,
of
of course.
how I ended up in the army, I mean, other than the story I told my grandfather earlier is after college, after I went to military school, Norwich University, um, I had some friends that were working in Manhattan and they were like much older than me. And they were like, Dave, come work in the private sector. The war is going to be over. Like, you don't need to do that stuff. And like, like for me in 2003, when I was 18 and graduating high school, like I was like ready. You know what I mean? I was like, this is my time. This is just like grandpa. Like I got to serve my country. Like, and I was gonna sign up and I was gonna sign up to be a ranger, right? And that was what I wanted to do. And my parents were like, how about this? Like you go to college and then go in the military, right? And I only applied to one school. I applied to Norwich. That was
Nice.
it. Right. And so and so that's how hell bent I was, at 18. And so I go and work in Manhattan in this ad agency. And here I am like doing like women's clothing, perfume, all sorts of stuff. Like I did laundry detergent, Purex, like a ton of I was all over the map, right? I didn't have a specialty. I was the get shit done guy, right? Project manager,
hmm
could just get it done. So I remember I was out with a friend, two friends, right? Actually it was one guy I worked closely with. One of the guys that was, grew up with around here. He worked down there. He's the one that got me into that company. I was out with his wife, her friend, and we went down to Ground Zero at in
Mm.
2008. This is 2000, and it was still two giant holes in the ground, and they have this huge chain link fence around. And I remember seeing it, and I remember breaking down crying. Like I had like a panic attack. I don't even know what it was, but it was just like I was hurt, man. Like it hurt deep to see it, right? And to live through it. And I remember I went home that night and I was living in this tiny one, right? And I was so proud because I negotiated salary for $43,500. I was so proud. My first real job,
Legend.
negotiated my salary. But I didn't know New York City taxes was like I was going to be paying 47% into taxes, So I was like, the conversation, the internal dialogue in myself was like, why do I bother working? Like, this is ridiculous, but you go, for all you young listeners out there, that's just part of your 20s, right? But if you sign up for the Adventure Plus package, go Special Forces, you know, you can have better financial outcomes, anyways, I'm just saying. But anyways, so I I looked at myself like so I go home and I'm looking at myself in my mirror and I say and I'm just like, who are you, dude? Like who are you? Like you're a friggin' Eagle Scout. Like you going up to like North Conway, doing snowshoeing, like almost freezing to death in the White Mountains. And, you went to Norwich University, right? A tough military school where it doesn't pride itself on its low acceptance rate. It prides itself on its attrition, right? So very different concept to a lot of top universities, right?
Wow.
Uh, and and so it doesn't really pride itself on its attrition. Us alumni we pride ourselves on its attrition. So just a caveat, not speaking for the school, but like anyways, like I'm looking at myself in the mirror and I'm just like, who are you, dude? You know? And at that time, Facebook was becoming a thing, and I was watching all my buddies from Norwich. They were graduating, they were the infantry officers, right? Like graduating IBOLIC, graduating Ranger School, and they were going to take platoons and go to war, either in Iraq or Afghanistan. And I was just like looking at myself, and and I'm like, this is, I think about my grandfather and everything else. And I was like, this is not who we are. We don't work at a desk, you know?
Mm,
This isn't, this isn't what we train for in our life. This isn't why we decided to do hard things, you know? What? So I can just, and I think also too, is I saw myself in 10 years, right? I was like 20,
hmm.
24 years old. I saw myself in 10 years and I hated that. I was just like, no, I hate this dude. Whoever I become, I don't like that. And so I decided to enlist, and I went in on St. Patrick's Day, 2010. Luck of the Irish, baby, right? And never looked back. Well, I mean, yeah, at that, yeah, literally never looked back, and I just jumped on every opportunity I could.
That's cool. And again, I think that like a lot of what's in your book, that's relatable beyond just I think a lot of people face that decision of finding work that's more authentic to them.
Yeah, totally. And it's such a and it's funny because like, you grow in life, right? And I thought I was like, oh, you're gonna be clawing me to get me out of the military. And I'm just like I have 13 years, 8 months, so close to 14 years in it. You see that's a common thing in Green Berets and SEALs, like, your body's pretty messed up after, just about 14 years, when it also is like, for growth for me, as a person that's very much always looking for growth, always looking for, new things, it was a right time for me, in that and by virtue of this book and everything else, it's like this is more of a right. And so I have always been of the mind, like I will always I won't shy away from trying stuff, I just jump in with 2 feet. And I'm like, all right, we'll figure it out. Well, I'll make the best of it. Like that's how I am. And it's
Adventure.
exactly how I went about doing the book. Is just like everyone's like, so, do you have a publicist? Do you have I'm like, no, man, I'm just jumping in, I'm figuring out, like,
Oh
like
man.
it's just like, and it's just like it's such a New Englander mentality. Like, I'll figure it out on my, figure it out on my own. Like my dad's like, he's like, battling cancer, and he's just like, I don't need help. I'll be fine. I just got to keep working, and it's just, it's a little bit of that mentality too, but it's just, I think I talk to like a lot of Green Beret buddies of mine, and I had a buddy of mine, Chris, and he really helped me with my transition out of the military and sort of like, and I think one of the things that me and him say to each other, it's our turn to have fun.
Mm,
Like let's just have fun. Like and keeping that. like I'll always be a child, right? I don't think I'll ever like I'm 39. I still think I'm 12, and life is still very interesting to me all the time. And I just learned how to ski this past winter.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
yeah, and and like quintessential SF guys, like, oh, there's no fear. Like, I'm just like barreling down, no pizza, all French fry, right? Like going down this mountain. And the conversation I have with myself is, I got this, 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 right? Like just reading over, right? I could slow down, but I'm having too much fun, right? So it's just like, you know what? You don't need to be going chasing gunfights and stuff like that. And, there's other ways to fill your buckets, in a healthy way. And so, I'm really glad that I discussed. So it's like I'm finding things that are very much like in my personality, and it's just a lot of fun. But it's like we say, it's our turn to have fun. So let's the time, man. We're only on this earth for so long.
Yeah, amen. What's the line from Spinal Tap? Have a good time all the time.
True. Yeah, very true. Yeah.
Dave, thank you so much for doing this and the very best to your dad,
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Well, the book is Into the Darkness, A Journey of Love, War, and Emotional Freedom. If you have an epic story, I'd love to hear it. You can find me at dailypros.com or on LinkedIn. My links and Dave's are in the show notes. Thanks for listening.